We just had inauguration day.
Mm-hmm.
We have a new president, and one of the talking points for the last 20 years, at least in politics, has been immigration. But there is a push in that narrative where it's only it don't it seems like, if you don't know any better, that all immigration is bad and all immigration is illegal, and that's not the case.
Absolutely.
So the definition of a refugee. What does it take for an individual to show up here? You pick them up from the airport and you help them. How did they get to the airport at
Yeah.
JIA?
And if you don't mind me expanding on your question a little bit and
Please.
just talk about all the pathways so that the terminology you hear that might be incorrect, you know and understand that.
Mhm.
So the southern border is obviously in the news day in and day out. It has been for several years. It was on the highlight, through the entire, presidential process because it was talked about all the time.
Right.
And so the southern border has basically two different types of people that come to that: asylum seekers and the undocumented. The
Mhm.
undocumented are sneaking across and just trying to find their way without any level of checking in with the government, without anything else, and those do create problems because they can't legally work. And so there are some huge challenges within that. But the asylum seekers that are coming to the southern border are trying to do things the right way. And so they come and they check in with the Border Patrol or what other agencies are, depending on where they come across, and they request asylum, which is the right in any country to request an asylum in the country. And so then they are given, most of the time they're given a phone so they can be contacted. It's just a little flip phone. It has almost no value to it, but it's so they can be contacted. And they're told they will be set up with a court date where they can present their cause for why they feel like asylum should be granted to the judge, and the judge can either say no and you have to go back, or yes, welcome to the country. And that is a lengthy process because there's so many of them. And then you also have the people that are that we serve with, the refugees, are the ones that I mentioned that are registered with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. That registration gives them refugee status.
Mhm.
And that status is what, like I said, once they've been fully vetted, then they're on the list to come over here. I mentioned a couple minutes ago that our government for the year committed to 125,000 of those. Well, there's 10 resettlement agencies in the country that share those 125,000. And they have offices all around the country. So they all will report to the State Department and say, I can take 10,700 of those with the capacity I have in my offices around the country. And they'll say done, and they'll get that with each of those 10 agencies. And then those agencies will share those refugees as they come in with each of their offices. And that is what we are, one of those offices here
Right.
in Northeast Florida. So our commitment for this year is 150 total refugees, which will represent somewhere between 40 and 50 families.
Okay.
And so they will be, we will get an email and what country they're from, what languages they speak, and then we'll get an email that says travel has been booked for, and then all of a sudden there's all the flight information. You see, oh, they're coming in 12 days and their flight lands at 9 in the evening. So we've got those 12 days to go find an apartment for them, to furnish that apartment, to go grocery shopping, fill the pantry, fill the refrigerator, and then we literally go pick them up at the airport.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the second half of what we do, by the way. That's called First 90 because we just started that in our first family in January 24. So that just started a year ago. We got permission from the State Department to be in that mix for that.
Okay.
And so then we're responsible for that family for the first 90 days, for all their doctor's appointments, getting the kids enrolled in school, getting them Florida IDs, getting them tested for ESOL and into English classes if they don't have good English yet. And we do 10 hours of what's called cultural orientation, where we teach them how the country works.
Mm-hmm.
How do you know when to go to your primary care versus the urgent care versus an emergency room?
Can I take that?
Well, a lot of Americans should take that. I'm telling you, it's funny because usually have volunteers that teach that, and we'll get a volunteer to come out and go, I learned a lot.
Sure.
But we talk about food safety. We talk about, if something in your apartment isn't right, how do you get that taken care of? And just, the common things that, for the most part, we take for granted. And just as a funny side note, when my wife and I moved to that, before we moved into that apartment complex, and one of the families that really struck us, that got started this, was a mom and her twin sons from Ethiopia, and the boys were 21, and mom didn't speak any English, and the boys had some passable English. And so we go over there after work one day just to check on them, and they point at the microwave and they say, "What is that?" And and my wife says, "Do you have any leftover food? It's for warming up leftover food." They said, "Oh yes, we made spaghetti yesterday." And so, well, let me show you how that works. They opened up the cabinet underneath the sink, and there was a pot of spaghetti and a pot of sauce because they didn't know what the refrigerator was.
Yeah.
They had never, I mean, they had lived in a refugee camp for over a decade, no power, no running water. I mean, the things like I said that are so normal for us.
Right.
And so just the common household equipment, the appliances that we're used to, they're looking at it, go, what do I do with that?
Yeah.
And the other funny part of that was mom points up at the smoke detector and goes, woo, woo. And he said, that go off? And yeah,
Yeah.
she's nodding her head going, yeah, it did. So, just, like I said, just simple things like that. But then that family for us was a huge realization of what the need was for some of these families, and, and how to, the road they had in front of them. And you couldn't accomplish being self-sufficient here in 90 days with that deficit coming into the
No.
country.
No, not at all.